Today's session is entitled Supercharge Operations with Intelligent Inventory and Assurance. So as the title suggests, we're going to be focusing on inventory and assurance requirements and being able to leverage new techniques to really supercharge and really drive optimization of these systems. So we have a really timely and interesting webinar for you today. We have two speakers from today's sponsor, Amdocs, who are joining us. And presenting first will be Simon Durant. Simon is Director of Product Management at Amdocs. Also joining us is Norby Liron, who is Director of Product Line Management at Amdocs as well. And I'll be moderating today's session. So the way we've set up today's session is we're going to start first talking about intelligent relationships. And I've got a slide that just kind of ties together some of the requirements and the relationships between data and automation and inventory and assurance systems. So we're going to start talking about that very briefly. And then I'm going to turn the presentation over to Simon to talk about the impact of intelligent automation, because obviously automation plays a key role in developing the relationships or leveraging these intelligent relationships. So then we'll talk about inventory and in terms of how to leverage all these tools and techniques. And then also we'll turn it over to Norby. We'll talk about assurance and really kind of closing the loop and being able to leverage automation and data to really provide a strong customer experience and also supercharge and optimize operations. And then we'll wrap up with a section called Supercharge Operations that'll really tie all the concepts together. And then we'll also have time for Q&A. We'll also be stopping and conducting poll questions to the audience, some input into the topics and the concepts we're going to be presenting. So we have a lot of excellent material for you today and two subject matter expert speakers, so it'll be a great session. So before I do turn the presentation over to Simon, though, I did want to talk about intelligent relationships. So I call this intelligent relationship. Think about how we're developing and really networking or designing networks today. We really have obviously embraced the cloud, so we're really driving a lot of hybrid network coexistence, and that's an important part of this. Obviously, it gives us scale and gives us superior customer experience options if we can run services anywhere in clouds or at the edge or in private networks. But you know, I guess the challenge of that is that it also generates a lot of complexity. So these hybrid networks are more complex from a service and from an operations perspective. And we also need to think about that in the context of the operational cost and managing things like inventory systems and assurance, which we'll be focusing on in today's webinar. But you know, at the same time, while the complexity that could drive more potential costs, there's obviously really a lot of pressure on service providers to be able to optimize operations, inventory, and assurance to lower costs, so they can scale this to the levels required for these these new services that are cloud-based or even current services as well. So I call this intelligent relationships because it's clear that of all of this, we need to be able to look at how we manage the relationships between data, inventory, and assurance. Clearly, these new networks and this disaggregated hybrid form are going to really generate a lot of data. That data needs to be analyzed because it has a lot of linkages. For example, there's a lot more linkages in cloud and 5G networks between data and APIs, exposing APIs either at the edge or in the 5G core. So there's a lot of new nuances that are really a part of this whole system. As I said, hybrid network coexistence is also an important part of this because we'll be generating and really analyzing data from different parts of the network, which is not something that we've done for many years. And also we're looking at how to develop data and intent-driven operations, being able to manage operation systems with the latest data that gives the network operator the best window or the best visibility in what decisions to make from a policy, whether it be from an inventory and assurance perspective. So that's a clear part of all this from a data perspective. So as I said, we're going to be focusing on these two areas, inventory and assurance, and they're both unique. So for example, in the inventory part, we see, we're developing inventory systems need to be able to support new service streams. They also need to be able to support a lot of new devices. But at the end of the day, even in this hybrid environment, it needs to be able to support this ubiquitous cross-domain user experience. So you need to be able to manage inventory in the context of user experience as well. And that's also a change. And as well, an assurance perspective, the service complexity is also increasing. I mentioned just, hybrid and disaggregated networks, but also the services are becoming more complex. When slicing becomes monetized later this year, next year, that will add a lot of complexity for assurance and how these services are orchestrated. And then also, there's been a lot of work over the last 2 years about analytics and how it can be used for service quality management. So there's a lot of different moving parts to all this as well. So at the end of the day, these intelligent relationships, in my view, are really important because they not only have an impact on inventory and assurance systems, but really they really play a key role or a critical role in how operationally service providers are going to be able to manage network complexity, but at the same time boost their efficiency and drive innovation. And obviously a big part of this will be automation and AI as well, because of the ability to support these complexities in real time and be able to leverage AI and automation for analysis of a lot of data that these networks are going to be developing. So that's kind of the key part I wanted to get across this. And obviously in today's presentation, we're going to dive down a lot deeper and focus on these relationships in more detail. So with that, I'm going to actually turn over the presentation over to Simon, who's going to cover the assurance part. So Simon, I'm going to push out your first slide. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks for having us today. So here we go. So CSPs are under a lot of pressure, and that maybe more than ever before, and that's coming from multiple directions. So we see pressure coming from customers, whether that's consumers or businesses. They're demanding more agile digital experiences, and they want faster, more flexible interactions, whether that's in the pre-sales phase or post-sale as they take advantage of the services that they've procured. We also see pressure coming from the networks, where we have new technologies being rolled out, and those bring new opportunities to offer more differentiated services, but that brings with it new complexities, and those complexities are particularly challenging for operations organizations, where you still have to support all the old stuff. The new technologies don't immediately displace what's gone before them. So you have to continue supporting what you have today, and then you have all these new complexities coming along as well. And then thirdly, we have pressure in the financial domain. I know a lot of CSPs are seeing their revenues become more flat and possibly even declining in some areas. But the costs that go along with that are not so flat. We see high inflation rates around the place, and we have that demand from customers just expecting ubiquitous connectivity, wanting ever more data, but expecting a relatively similar cost for that. And CSPs need to find that money to invest in the new technology. So there's pressure all around. Automation is absolutely key as a technique to release that pressure. So that might be facing your customers. Looking for automated ways of delivering those customers' experiences with your always-on self-service portals, so that the experience that the customer's expecting, they go to your website, they go to your app, they put in what they need, and it's done. That's the level that we aspire to these days as customers and as suppliers. Automation helps us increase that operational efficiency. So being able to detect those same old challenges that are coming around, and being able to automatically roll out that known solution, so that your operations team are able to spend their time more efficiently addressing new challenges, new problems. And then thirdly, automation is absolutely critical in rolling out new technologies, new services, and driving new revenue streams, so that we can grow the business and generate that extra revenue and reduce the time to market. So we see that automation is critical in all of the phases of the service lifecycle, from design and orchestration through activation into operations and assurance. But we also see that inventory is absolutely central to all of that. So in the design phase, to determine which resources we're going to use to capture that design, make sure that that's what we implement in our orchestration and activation, and that we are assuring against that design, and that we are delivering what we sold. Okay, let's move on and talk about inventory some more. Great. So what do we need from an inventory? In these sessions, we often like to talk about all of the new stuff, the newest technologies, the new things that are coming, what's coming down the line in the next few years. But the reality is those things don't exist in isolation. They stand on the shoulders of what's gone before, and they depend on existing technologies in some way. They're delivered as part of a suite of products, some of which are new, some of which are not so new. And so being able to, in your inventory, represent any of those services, whether that's your latest and greatest 5G slices or bread and butter, consumer processes, services such as broadband, or business processes such as IPVPN, you need your inventory to be able to address all of those different kinds of services. Similarly, in the network representation, you need to be able to address not just the latest and greatest, but also those things that have gone before. And that extends, from those virtualized new technologies all the way to the routine physical servers, rack space, all of that stuff. Because in practice, what CSPs do is in some senses solving a geographical problem, and that differentiates them from some of the hyperscalers and media providers and app providers and so on. The business is about getting data from one place to another geographically. So where your customer is, whether that is a fixed premise or being able to address a wide mobile capability, but knowing where your customers are is important in designing the service to give them the best experience. You want to make sure that if you're provisioning some virtualized component, you're provisioning it close to them as far as you're able to. So having an inventory that supports that coexistence of existing and new technologies and services is absolutely vital. Once we have our data in the inventory representing that technology, representing those services, we need to think about how do we get the best value from that data across our organization. And that is really a question of getting the right integrations, whether that's with planning, thinking about where do we need to roll out new network capacity and managing the process of that network build, whether that's fulfillment, so delivering customer services, understanding from our service ready network which resources can we assign to this service, and into assurance. What was the service that we designed? Is that the service that we're delivering? If we need to change it, how can we change it whilst maintaining the right service characteristics? And we found that a great tool for managing those integrations are the open APIs from TM Forum. And I'm not going to drill into all of those detailed specifications at the moment, but I want to just make a mention on catalog. These APIs are necessarily, they have a fairly broad definition of a service and a broad definition of a resource, because they're addressing, as we've seen, many different flavors. And therefore, catalog is absolutely critical to be able to define what are the characteristics of this particular kind of service? What are the expected relationships for this type of resource? So having a strong catalog capability is also really important in your inventory, so that you know what your models are expected to be, and you can ensure that you're working working in accordance with those specifications. Okay. All of this absolutely depends on having great data quality, which is a perennial problem. Okay. And automation is a great tool to drive data quality. You know, when we want to do service design and we want to get it right first time, that relies on having accurate data for both the service ready network that we're going to deliver that service across, and also the existing services that are already taking capacity from that service ready network. So that means that when we do our network build and our network rollout, and we do our maintenance activities for that service ready network, we want to do that hand in hand using the inventory. So we, you know, that might be a design first, it might be a sync later. Either way around, we want to make sure that we keep the inventory aligned with what exists in the field, or what we expect is going to exist shortly in the field. And then similarly, as we do service fulfillment, we want to make sure that we're capturing the design of the service we're about to implement. We know what resources we've allocated to it, and you know, we make sure we don't allocate those same resources to somebody else tomorrow. And similarly with closed loop assurance processes. So if we're, you know, if we've detected a problem with the service, we've needed to take some remedial action, we need to make sure that as part of that closed loop process, we're also updating that expected definition of the service in the inventory. So all of that is all well and good if you've got one inventory to rule them all. But the reality is that's almost never the case. In practice, we find that data is fragmented across a variety of different inventory systems within the organization. And there's a whole host of different reasons why that happens. It might be that you've got inventories that were rolled out at different times with different technologies, and so you've got some variety there. It might be that you've accumulated a collection of inventories through mergers and acquisitions, or it might even be that you've intentionally separated data as part of a restructuring of your organization, separating out your wholesale and your retail organization, or however else you might have divided it up. So there's good reasons why that happens, but having that silo effect, it hinders your automation. It hinders getting the maximum value from the data that you're holding there. So how do we address that? So one strategy that we see in use is federation. So this is where we don't, you know, maybe we don't try and replace all of those existing inventories. We don't try and bring all of the complexity of each of those technologies up to the consuming integrations, but we create a federated layer. We perhaps simplify some of the data as we do this, so that we just focus on what is it we need, and we manage it from there. Similarly, you might be doing a system replacement here, where let's say our inventory for WDM is no longer doing the job that we need it to. We've got a big upgrade coming along. We're doing a transformation into a new inventory, but we're taking the opportunity while we're at that to federate some data in from FTTX, which is relevant to the use case that we're addressing here. Or thirdly, we might just be bringing a whole new domain into play. We've got new inventory for 5G. But again, we might have an interest in those processes because this stuff hardly ever stands alone. We might have some interest in what's going on in WDM or what's going on in FTTX, and therefore we need to bring some subset of that data, maybe in a simplified form, into the federation so that we can interact with the things that we need there. So as we talk to CSPs who want to modernize their inventory, what is it that they're looking for? Well, the first thing is to manage risk, trying to avoid big bang approaches, and to manage, to be clear about the return on investment for that process. Another is to be driven by the use cases and the business priority, so that we can do the right things in the right order. Thirdly, and this has come through, I think, throughout what we've discussed so far, is being able to support not just the new stuff, but also the existing technologies and services that are related to that. And finally, to be able to support that range of services, whether that's for consumers or business or reselling. So just a little word at this point about the Amdocs network inventory offering. So we have a long history in Amdocs with inventory. I've personally been involved with our inventory products for well over 20 years. And we have deployments with customers right around the world of all shapes and sizes. And they're using our inventory to model a whole range of different services and a whole range of different network technologies, physical, logical, virtual, etc. As we discussed, we've been actively pursuing the standards aligned open APIs over several years now, and we have several customers, many customers who are taking that up. Jim, that's probably a good moment for me to welcome you back.
Great, thanks, Sam. Excellent presentation. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of moving parts to the inventory considerations as we move forward. So yeah, we want to stop and conduct our first poll question, and it's so that we really wanted to get your insight into drivers for inventory modernization, as Simon talked about federation replacing legacy and integrating. So we want to know, the poll question is, what are the main drivers for your inventory modernization? Is it the end of life of existing inventories? Is it deployment of new programmable networks such as 5G? Is it a move to public cloud adoption, things like DevOps, CI/CD? Or is it cost of reduction through automation? So it'd be interesting to see what the audience comes back to this with. But one of the things that you talked about was data fragmentation, and I totally agree that data fragmentation is something that all service providers really need to manage, because, like you said, there's been acquisitions, just historical different networks have really driven development of different inventory systems that don't necessarily interact. But one thing I wanted to talk about was, you also mentioned APIs, and I've always felt that open APIs would play a key role in kind of being able to sort of manage the transition, whatever approach service providers take. Are you seeing more and more of that today? I mean, open APIs have been around for some time, but it seems that because of the cloud, because of 5G and API exposure and third-party application, are you starting to see there's a lot more interest in leveraging these open APIs amongst service providers?
Yeah, I think there's kind of an expectation that if we need to do integration, then our first choice would be to do that via the open APIs. There's not an open API for every single integration use case, so it's not the answer 100% of the time. But these days it's certainly the first question is can we use the open APIs for that? If not, why not? and and how do we make that work? So yeah.
Right. Because obviously, operationally, that can have some impacts as well in terms of reducing costs.
Yeah.
Okay, the audience members have still a few more submitting their inputs, but let's go ahead and just kind of see what we have here. So, pretty close here. A couple of ties actually. End of life of existing inventory is 27%, 27 for new 5G programmable networks. Cost through automation was 27, and DevOps was 18. So, when we developed this question, we kind of expected that there would be a couple of high runners here. So I'm not too surprised. Maybe, I think if we were to ask this question maybe 2 or 3 years from now and move to public cloud, DevOps, CI/CD, that probably would be higher. But the reality is, as you said, Simon, service providers are dealing with a lot of different types of networks. They're starting to migrate some things to public cloud, but they still have a lot of existing legacy services they need to manage as well. So is there anything sort of surprise from your part of this at all in these responses?
No, that's pretty well aligned, I guess, with what we see.
Okay, perfect. Okay, let's continue. Now we're going to move to the assurance part of our presentation, and Norby is going to be our presenter. So Norby, I'll push out your first slide and turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So I'll be speaking about the service assurance side, of course, closing everything with everything that Simon was explaining about the inventory. And the first thing we need to look at is that once you have all the data in the inventory, the next step you want is to close the loop and use an intelligent assurance for that. So being able to detect potential problems, diagnose them, make decisions based on them, and then do something to close that. With that in mind, that brings me to the fact that CSPs are now looking differently at things. If once you were looking at the manual option and the bottom-up situation, if there is a problem in the network, how do I solve that? Regardless of what's the impact on the customers, now we are all looking at the more centric approach, a more autonomous approach, service and customer centric. So from a top-down perspective, is my customer being affected? What services are they using? How are they being affected? And looking from an intent-driven service, be more proactive and try to be as autonomous as possible. And this is something we see in every single CSP, but mainly we can see that the 5G challenges are the ones that are impacting everybody. So every CSP that is moving into the 5G networks is always looking at new use cases, what's happening with network slices, mobile edge computing, virtual networks. It's a whole lot of complexity here and dynamicy here that brings the impact that we are seeing and how this affects the service assurance and the fact that we need a more dynamic and more intelligent service assurance to bring the closed loop. From an intelligent service assurance perspective in general, and we are talking always about the performance management, fault management, service quality management, but the idea is how are they integrated together? How much intelligence can you put into all the three of them to really do proper service assurance? There is a whole dynamicy needed, the programmable networks, the holistic approach, okay? Being able to automate things, to be more analytical, proactive, use more AI, ML. There are a lot of capacities and capabilities here that impact the way that CSPs are looking at the assurance and how much this assurance needs to be intelligent and not just looking into a fault management, performance management, and service quality management as separate capabilities, but always trying to focus into the service and the end-to-end service that we are providing our customers. And before we go on, Jim, I think it's a good point to actually have a poll question, and then we can keep going.
Perfect. Okay. So this one, we're going to be focusing on, before we get into Norby's presentation, we just wanted to ask the audience, at what point are you in your journey to integrated service assurance? Is it not started yet, planning to start soon, evaluating vendors and solutions, in deployment with go live plan the next year, or in production? So this will give us a bit of a level set, Norby. But while we're waiting for the audience to provide their input into it, so if you can provide input now, audience, that'd be really helpful. You talked about sort of integrated assurance and sort of end to end. So there's clearly a lot of moving parts to this. I guess, when I think of assurance, I tend to think of it as something that's really, in the new model, is really focusing on holistic service models. And this obviously is not in the poll question, but I'm just wondering, from your perspective, this whole view of integrating and leveraging automation for integrated assurance, this is something it's happened, I think, over the last, to me, in my view, 18 months, but it's becoming much more important. It's something now that, to me, is almost becoming table stakes. But do you think there was maybe just sort of one trigger that started sort of this whole view of integrated service assurance? Was it 5G? Was it NFV? Was it SD-WAN? Was it the cloud? I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, or was it multiple factors in your view?
I think there are multiple factors. Okay, we tend to say 5G, but it really, there were multiple factors, and sadly the COVID situation and the fact that everybody started using much more services and the dynamic services. It was the main factor, but there are multiple factors: the changes in technologies, the new services, the needs for holistic networks, CSPs that are driving and diving into new networks and technologies. It's a combination of everything.
Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, perfect question. That's exactly what I was thinking. But okay, great. We certainly had no shortage of disruptive activities in the last few years. Okay. So let's see where we are. So the audience, please keep providing your input. So almost a third, 27%, said they haven't started yet. 45%, 46% saying they're going to start soon. They're in the evaluation phase. 18%, small group, say that they're planning to go live in the next year, and about 9%, the early adopters, say that they're in production. Again, I'll ask you the same question I asked Simon. Are you any sort of surprises by these numbers?
Not really. It's what we see on CSPs. There are a couple that are already in production with integrated and intelligent service assurance. The most are planning, are checking the possibilities, are comparing and evaluating all the solutions out there. It's what we see all the time, and I'm happy we are aligned.
Yeah, and I think a part of that too is just the fact that integrating automation into solutions from a vendor perspective, from a service provider, implementing those solutions, it takes time. So I think we're still in sort of the early phases, but I think as an industry, these numbers and all of the other research I did really confirms that automation is the future from to achieve operational excellence and to really be able to achieve faster time to market and a sort of a broader holistic customer experience. Okay, so we're gonna continue our journey here and talk about the power of assurance. I'm going to push out your next slide, and I'll turn the presentation back over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim. So, with everything just said, the poll question and taking everything into account, one of the main things that we are all looking is a solution, an assurance solution that has powerful capabilities. And we are talking about simple things. I'll start from the bottom left, monitoring. We all know we want to monitor the network and the different networks. We all know that we want to look into the service quality management. So what are the services that our customers are using and what is the quality that they're getting? Of course, looking into threshold management. So kind of service level agreements, SLOs, objectives. Where am I? What type of thresholds should I have in my assurance system to make sure that my customers are happy? Correlation of information from different sources, getting to the root cause analysis, what is the most probable root cause for potential problems or existing problems. I'll actually skip into the analytics because that will bring me into the automation. So to be able to automate things, of course, I need very good analytic capabilities. If it's AI, ML, and all this source of information, that brings me into the automation. So integrating all these capabilities, that's what we call an integrated assurance. That's what will bring me to an automated assurance that can close the loop and help us really managing the complex and the holistic networks. If talking about analytics, okay, there is a whole new approach that we need to think of. And the approach is saying, look, it's not just about being proactive, but it's also about being predictive. So we want to be able to analyze the information, predict behavior. Is it normal? Is it abnormal behavior? Are we looking at what if scenarios? What if this and this will happen? What will be the impact on the service, on my customers? That will trigger events even before they happen, because they can now predict and say, look, based on wherever it's happening on the network and used to happen on the network, this is where we are going, and therefore be reactive based on that. So based on all that information, can I automatically define what is the root cause of the problem? Can I identify trends? Can I make sure that I reduce the noise that my operator is getting? So make sure that they're focused on what they need. All these, at the end of the day, will improve my operational efficiency, and of course will enhance the customer experience. And this is a process, okay? This is an automation process. You can look at everything all the time, going round and round. So yes, I enhance the customer experience. Now let's start again, because with a new experience, customers always would like to have even a better experience. So let's check out the new experience. Is this an abnormal behavior? How do I fix that? Let's be reactive. Let's improve again, and so on. So it's a whole loop of the way we work with the service assurance. This brings me to what Amdocs brings into the table. Amdocs brings a powerful integrated service assurance. We are talking about performance management, okay, which is the way we can monitor and manage complex integrated networks. Fault management, looking into anything that we can diagnose and rectify on the network. And of course, the service quality management, which will be get all that information from the network, aggregate that into the service level, and look from a customer and service perspective and top down. So let's make sure that the service and the customer is happy with the service we are offering. So we bring that with the Amdocs Helix Service Assurance Suite, which integrates all the three. With that in mind, I actually want to go into Supercharge operations. So now let's think about everything I just spoke: service assurance, integrated service assurance, fault performance, and service quality. Top down, looking from the customer perspective, what service affecting problems do we have or not, plus everything that Simon spoke about, which is the inventory and how they're all related together. Because at the end of the day, you probably are asking yourself, okay, what's in it for me? So let's take one example, 5G, a vehicle to anything kind of a slice. So I'm connecting from my car while driving to everything. If I'm using maps, if I'm using some kind of a connection to a voice call or whatever else I'm using, and I may have a problem. So the service assurance side can detect the problem, okay? And using all the intelligent capabilities we have there, we should be able to diagnose the problem, understand what is the SLA, how is it impacted? Use the service intent to define that this particular vehicle or this particular slice should have these KPIs, so these performance indicators, these quality indicators, and based on that, be able to decide, is it going well? Yes, no, and what to do with that. Integrating that with the inventory will enable us to decide what should be done. So an orchestrator system that can integrate all this information that came from the service assurance into the inventory and get back all the changes that should happen to solve the potential problems that we just found. So what do? I activate a new thing, okay? And the whole service is restored to a better situation. So again, I'll just go back for a sec. The idea is, as I said, the integration between the service assurance and the inventory to solve a potential problem in the network. And as Jim said at the very beginning, it's all data driven. So we get data from the network, from the slice, from the virtual, the physical stuff. The inventory can help with the decisions, what decisions to make. The orchestrator can fix the problem, activate the new service so the car can still connect to everything. And this will, at the end of the day, automate the whole thing. So we're now talking about a fully integrated service assurance, inventory, orchestrator, all data-driven, AI, ML, and getting into a situation where the customers will be happy just because we solve all the problems as automated as possible without worrying about new technologies, old technologies, or whatever other problems that could be there. Kind of summarizing a little bit, you saw everything, but again, the idea is from design to the orchestration, activation, operation, assurance, all through the inventory and the data-driven integrated capabilities. Jim, back to you.
Thanks, Novi. Excellent presentation. So now we're going to move into our Q&A section. So, but before we do, as the operator said at the beginning of the session, if you can, the audience, if you can provide us feedback on today's session and take the survey before you log off, that would be really helpful to us as well. And yeah, that would be great. And also, audience, if you have any questions for us, please submit them now. There's a couple of questions in here that we'll get to. We have some time for Q&A. But maybe just before we do that, Norby, if you don't mind, maybe if we go back to this one, I just wanted to make sure I understood. So this kind of this service intent, where this model where you talked about sort of V to X, service intent SLA, basically kind of leveraging, I guess it's kind of on this chart, kind of leveraging this whole intent-based networks. This is it's a powerful concept. Is this something, again, that is really kind of coming to the forefront because of 5G, or is it cloud-based, or is it just complexity of services in general?
So I would say that 5G really pushed the intent-based operations and the intent-driven monitoring and assurance. But it is something that comes from the fact that networks are even more complex than before. And yes, intent-driven is something that we see more and more. And the 5G at the end of the day made all our lives very complex and all the networks very complex. And the complexity, it's what changed the way we are looking at things and looking into the intent-driven operations, looking at what is the intended service and the intended quality of service that the particular customer wants, to then make all the decisions and all the assurance and make sure that the inventory is up to what we need based on that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's now move to Q&A. There are some questions that just came in. As I said to the audience, if you can submit some more questions, we would likely have time for almost all of them. So Sam, I'm going to start with you. There was a question about here, I'll kind of paraphrase it about, it was actually two questions. One about how does federation work? Or I guess first of all, the question was, what is federation? And certainly my interpretation of federation is being able to take data from various databases or various sources, being kind of able to pull it in and analyze it as if it was kind of at least from a software perspective, a single database. But maybe you can kind of give us your view of what you consider federation. And then the other question relates to when you talked about federation, you talked about there were kind of different approaches and that customers could follow different approaches to kind of evolve their inventories based on their services, on what databases they had, and their whole legacy network perspective. So maybe Sam, you can just kind of give us your view of, at a high level, what federation is and what approaches are out there from a federation perspective, and maybe which one do you see your customers are actually using from that perspective?
Sure. So I think, if we separate out a kind of a simpler scenario from a more complex scenario, at the simpler end of things, maybe simple is too far, but at the simpler end of things, you've got essentially a way of looking into that existing inventory, pulling back in real time a subset of the data, simplifying that, and then presenting that together with other data from other sources to make a coherent whole. Okay, and so there's no real persistence in that federation layer. It's just providing some level of transformation, some level of selectiveness around how much we bring, and then looking at how to identify that I've got the same device represented in two different inventories that are interested in different information about that device. How do I correlate that so that we know that they're the same thing? So that's a kind of more simplified kind of federation, and I guess that's probably the level at which we're seeing most activity currently. And then I guess if you look down the road in a more visionary direction, there's trying to do more of a read-write kind of federation where you're providing some kind of proxy level persistence that acts as a delegate for that second level inventory. That's much more challenging because you're bringing up some of that business logic that's embedded within that lower level inventory into the middle tiers, into that middle layer. So you to address that, you need to be very clear about what your use cases are for where that's good value. Yeah, you can't bring the entire capability of your existing inventory into that federation layer. Otherwise, you might as well have done a transformation project. Yeah, so it's just being clear about which are the targeted use cases where that level of federation, maybe it's just feasibility, service feasibility is enough, and then the detailed fulfillment would actually go to the specific targeted inventory that you've selected at the end of that feasibility process. So it's all about understanding what's the subset of data that's interesting. How do we present that up? Is it enough to do that? Bringing it in real time, or is there a reason why you would want to kind of duplicate that and add another version of the truth over the top? Now, there might be some reasons that you need to do that for availability or that kind of thing.
Okay, so just another interesting part of this is like things with IoT. Obviously, IoT devices, we've been forecasting that the number of IoT devices will grow in the billions the last couple of years, but it is starting to happen now. So from an IoT perspective, these IoT devices, there might be more of them than 5G devices or 4G devices, but they're going to generate kind of less, as you said, interesting data. So in theory, I guess I've always thought that from a federation perspective or from an data analyzation perspective and inventory, they shouldn't generate a lot more complexity for service providers because of the type of information that they're generating. Of course, not all IoT devices, some will be critical, some will be lower level in terms of data. But I guess my question is, does IoT drive a lot more complexity than maybe 5G devices, or is it a sheer numbers game, or is it's less of an impact because they typically develop or typically generate less data because maybe they're just sending out device reports on a sort of a frequent level, but it's at a low level in terms of how much data they actually generate. So a long-winded question. I guess the question is, from a IoT perspective, do you see this as something that's a major impact on the need for either data federation or kind of going into a whole new sort of green field to manage this from a new perspective?
It's interesting as to see which of those effectively consumer devices in the IoT space need a presence in the inventory. Sometimes there's a representation in the service inventory. We're interested to know that this particular end customer has this selection of devices that they're using, but it's less often that needs to go all the way into the detailed resource inventory. And you're right in terms of the complexity of the data and the complexity of the devices. The closer you go to the edge, to the customer, typically the simpler the devices become, and the closer you go to the core, the more complex they become from a inventory perspective. That's a bit of a generalization, but those high volume IoT, they tend to be at the edge, and therefore they're a simpler representation. We might need to know that it's there, but not often a great deal more than that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I think we've got some questions here, and I think Norby, these are going to kind of follow more into your area because they're kind of assurance related. So maybe just maybe let's kind of go through these. I guess the first question is, and you talked about this, Norby, about analytics and AI and ML capabilities. So I guess I'll kind of paraphrase it. Are the analytics capabilities, or the analytics AI ML capabilities, are they sort of tailored to the telecommunications industry, or are they kind of more generic and that are sort of cross domain in terms of cloud, or are they specifically sort of somehow shaped for telecommunications service providers? Norby?
Wow. Thanks. That's a great question, actually. We are using in Amdocs generic capabilities and standard capabilities, which we did somehow tweak for some of the telecom industry, but they are really generic at the end of the day, so we can modify them and adapt them as necessary for any needs, any kind of network, which doesn't have to be a telecommunication network. Again, for some of the capabilities of the service assurance, we did configure them specifically for telecommunications, but the AI ML capabilities behind the scenes are absolutely generic and standard-based capabilities.
Okay, perfect. There's another couple of questions here for you, and maybe one is related to, I'm just going to read them here, about 5G challenges. So in a nutshell, you mentioned in your presentation you gave some examples about the 5G challenges, and you talked about intent-driven closed loop for other technology domains. So we kind of had the discussion up front because I was interested in kind of this whole intent-based loop stuff that you were talking about as well. Just basically, I guess the question is, can your solution also deal with intent closed loop domain for maybe other technology domains. And that's kind of, just outside of the telecommunications domain.
So yes, Jim, as we spoke before, it all started from the 5G because it really made life complex for everybody. But we do have other technologies and domains out there where we are doing intent-driven closed loop. It's not just for 5G. We saw things like enterprise solutions where we needed to do that. The whole idea is that we have a service assurance suite that is agnostic, that covers any type of network or technology. And so certainly we can help, and we did help other CSPs or other areas, which is not only 5G based telecommunications networks. I hope that answers.
Great. Yeah, no, I think it really does, and I think you kind of, I think, touched on something that's really important, and that is in both of your presentations we talked about complexity, but the complexity in this whole intent-based insurance to me is part of the fact that service providers are kind of integrating their networks into the cloud. There's no sort of formal transformation project, but at the end of the day, because of the partnerships, because of the API, because of the way we're running services in public clouds, because we're moving with slicing, which might have enterprises which have some slices, those enterprise customers might have some databases in public cloud. To me, there's a lot of different moving parts to all this, and at the end of the day, we will be kind of moving to a closer integration. It's not necessarily formalized, but that's just kind of the reality of that. And that's the other thing I always talk about is ecosystem, and a lot of this with the open APIs that Simon was talking about to me was all about ecosystem as well. These open APIs open up ecosystems, and that opens up services. And then it kind of comes back to what you're talking about, Norby, about the need to be able to make those services and kind of have an end-to-end view of all of that. Okay.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So as I said at the very beginning, the audience, if you can provide us, we have about less than a minute left. If you can provide us input into today's session, take the survey now, that would help us. We've gotten to almost all the questions. There was like maybe one that we didn't get to, but we're going to have to wrap it up here because I don't think we'll be able to get it in time. But again, I would like to thank Amdocs for sponsoring today's session, and for Simon and Norby for presenting, give us these excellent presentations, and also to you, the audience, for giving us your insight and attention and input into the poll questions, and for your Q&A inputs as well. So for Light Reading, this is Jim Hodges. Thanks everyone for attending today's session, and we hope to see you again at a future webinar. So take care, everyone. Thank you.